The bullpen has been a main calling card for the Toronto Blue Jays all season long, and for the most part, they've been very good. Now, this is not to pin any blame on Eric Swanson or Jordan Romano for their recent performances, but they have been getting overworked, and their stuff is just not as sharp as it was to start the year. So, reports are coming out that the Blue Jays want to add a couple of pieces in the bullpen. So, we'll break that down and much more in this episode of Jays Digest. What's up, Jays fans? I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. And yesterday's game was probably the most devastating loss of the season for the Toronto Blue Jays. And that's saying something because there have been a lot of close losses, a lot of blown leads late in games, and a lot of games that just slipped away from the Toronto Blue Jays that makes you wonder where they would really be if they were playing up to their potential till this point of the season. But I think yesterday was the final straw, Nick, and it's coming to the point now where they need to add a couple of arms in that bullpen, maybe not even just one, maybe two or three, because they have been getting overworked, and Eric Swanson should have never came into that game yesterday.
Yeah, it's bringing back some wild card game two vibes, some maybe the Marcus Semien vibes from a couple years ago. But before we get into the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button. But you're right, very devastating loss, but a silver lining could be that maybe this just highlights more and more that Ross Atkins has a bit more work to do than maybe he originally thought, especially for the bullpen. And like you said earlier, multiple reports are coming out that the Blue Jays are going to be pursuing a reliever. This is on Ben Nicholson-Smith's article. Tons of other reporters have kind of touched on the same thing for the Blue Jays, but this is from probably the most reliable Jays insider saying, a more common suggestion heard from around the league, the Blue Jays will add a bat and a reliever in hopes that more modest additions augment a roster that quietly won 30 of its last 50 games. And this was, of course, before yesterday's devastating loss there. But will it be a major, huge splash? That's yet to be seen, but it seems like we're definitely going to add a bat and at least one reliever. I wouldn't mind seeing them add a couple. Of course, we do have Chad Green coming, but this bullpen is so overworked that even when you have a great game like Genesis Cabrera, who has been an unbelievable addition so far, you still have so many arms down that we were not able to finish that game yesterday, and we need to make an addition, and we need to do it quickly because this wildcard race is only getting tighter and tighter with the Red Sox coming up.
Right now, all the talk is about having a six-man rotation with Hyun-Jin Ryu and Alek Manoah back in the fold, but all that does is just it creates more pressure on those back end guys. Because okay, the whole point of going with a six-man rotation is to keep those starters fresh, but you're not giving your bullpen any break. And they've basically been going with a seven-man bullpen because Mitch White is occupying a roster spot, and they didn't even want to put him into the game yesterday when they were up by 4 runs. But because Eric Swanson is overworked and he's throwing 91, 92 miles an hour, Mitch White had to start the 10th inning, and of course, we know how that's going to go against that loaded Dodgers lineup. So you need another addition. It doesn't have to be an eighth or ninth inning guy, just someone to eat innings out there, someone that you could rely upon, because right now, Mitch White, you can't send him down. He basically has the Blue Jays handcuffed, and I don't understand the reason as to why they're just holding on to him. It was a failed trade. There's a bit of an ego right now from Ross Atkins to prove that he wasn't wrong for that trade, but it's been a total disaster. And Mitch White is just a black hole on this roster, and you can't even put him in low leverage spots. He's been that horrible when he has gotten in there. So the Jays need to add someone to eat innings, similar to like an Adam Simber type. Maybe someone that'll pitch two innings at a time, someone that'll come into middle relief like a David Phelps, someone like that, of that nature, and maybe not like a closer of sorts.
Yeah, kind of similar to the Trevor Richards trade from a couple years ago. But thinking about yesterday's game in particular, we sent down Nate Pearson because we had no option on Mitch White. And had we have DFA'd Mitch White a few days ago and kept Nate Pearson up, there could be a good argument that the Jays may have, won that game yesterday, because I would much rather see Nate Pearson in every situation than Mitch White, especially in an extra innings game. And he's a guy who can go multiple innings, and maybe would have been able to save Eric Swanson, who's overworked, because Nate Pearson has had a few blow-ups, but he's been very, very solid besides that. But touching on a potential candidate now, Jeff Passan reported this morning that the Cardinals are telling teams they are prepared to trade Jordan Montgomery, Jack Flaherty, Paul DeJong, and then haven't decided on Hicks or other outfielders. Now, the Cardinals are going to be sellers. Are we going to go for a starting pitcher? Probably not. But another report came out from Katie Wu, a Cardinals reporter, saying the Cardinals are selling. If both sides are unable to come to an agreement with Jordan Hicks, they will trade him by the deadline. Now, Jordan Hicks, he walks a lot of guys. He throws absolute gas. But the Cardinals are sellers, and maybe the Blue Jays could pursue one of the Cardinals relievers there or pitchers.
Yeah, and the Jays went out and got another Cardinals reliever a couple of days ago in Genesis Cabrera, and it's worked out pretty nicely thus far. He's had a couple of scoreless outings, hasn't walked a guy in 3 innings of work, and that was a big problem for him. Now, the Blue Jays pitching staff and pitching coaches, they are very good. They're established, and they've turned a lot of careers around for players that have made pit stops in Toronto. So I wouldn't be shocked if they turned around Jordan Hicks's control problems and he started throwing 102 and dotting up the corners. That'd be a welcome sight for the Blue Jays. They don't necessarily need a guy like Jordan Hicks. It's obviously a great luxury to have someone that throws that hard in your bullpen who can strike guys out, but it is definitely a name to monitor. There are other names like David Robertson of the New York Mets, and they just need someone at this point. Chad Green, I think he's going to do great, but you don't know what you're going to get out of him right away. So you need some instant relief, and one of these guys on the trade market, whether it be Hicks, Robertson, someone else, it's great relief.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you said, it's probably not going to be a big splash. And touching on the New York Mets, this was reported, earlier today or yesterday, saying that I'm hearing the Mets are now heavily leaning towards selling. Focus obviously is on rentals. Tommy Pham, David Robinson, Mark Canha, and as of right now, Mets front office seem unlikely that Justin Verlander or Max Scherzer are dealt unless getting blown away. Now this is good because realistically the Jays aren't going to go for someone like Verlander or Scherzer, but maybe a package surrounded around Tommy Pham, a guy who can match left-handed pitching, as well as David Robertson in one package would kind of get two birds with one stone there and get two assets and maybe be able to give up a little bit less and doing it separately could be an interesting, package. Would you be open to Tommy Pham, David Robertson package? I think it makes sense for both teams. It just depends on what the market is like and if the Blue Jays could top the package.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just don't see myself believing that the Mets are going to sell, even though they're a
Sure.
few games under 500 and they're still trying to make the playoffs, although it's probably a delusion at this point. They won't make it, but they're still trying to justify spending all that money in the offseason. So I don't know if they're going to be willing to part ways with those guys. Maybe Pham and Robertson make more sense because they're impending free agents and they're maybe not big parts of the team going forward. So that would make sense. But the Jays would have to give up some guys on their 40-man roster because there is a huge crunch right now. Now, whether it's prospect like
Hagen
Arelis
Danner.
Martinez, not Arelis Martinez, Hagen Danner,
Any of those guys,
just
yeah.
players of that nature. Someone to get off the roster so you can make space for them because obviously Mitch White's still there, and you got to make some room for this to happen. So it wouldn't be just straight minor leaguers for these guys. So it would probably hit a little bit closer to home for Jays fans having to say goodbye to those guys.
Yeah, and I saw a package that I found a little bit interesting. I forget who tweeted it out, but it was a package of Trevor Richards and Hagen Danner for those two because they get a guy with an option next year who Trevor Richards can help them win. Let's not kid ourselves here. The Mets are going to try to win next year, and I would not be surprised if they're number one in their division next year. But regardless, they get a prospect in Hagen Danner who is pretty close to MLB ready, and Trevor Richards who's had a dominant year, and we get Tommy Pham and David Robertson, who some would not even consider an upgrade over Trevor Richards. It kind of depends on what you're looking at, but in general, he has had a better year, which could be interesting. But I don't know. It's going to be very, very interesting to see. And like they said here, St. Louis could trade Hicks, and Hicks is the guy that we're kind of monitoring. It would be very, very interesting if they get it done. But the market's starting to open up a little bit. Obviously, trade deadline's a week away, so it's going to be interesting to monitor everything. Any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
Nick, it's just obvious that an upgrade needs to happen. Now, the Jays might not want to go all in. They haven't shown enough to want to go all in, and that's totally fair. But you can't go through the whole season like this. Eric Swanson is not the same pitcher that he was on opening day just because of sheer workload, and you got to give those guys a break, whether it's in the rotation, whether it's in the bullpen. Something's got to happen here because you can't keep running out the same guys day in, day out, and you can't have guys that you don't trust on your roster either.
Yeah, and my hope is that Ross Atkins obviously makes a move, but I'm hoping they don't put too much faith into guys like Chad Green and Hyun-Jin Ryu that makes them kind of scared to make a bigger move at the trade deadline because obviously Hyun-Jin Ryu will help the starting rotation. I have a bit of faith in him, but he's still a big question mark, 35 years old. And then Chad Green, who knows what he'll be? Could he be the dominant reliever he has been his whole career? It's very, very possible. Or could he be someone who struggles for a while and gets back to his kind of old self next year, which I think is a bit more likely because that's usually what happens off Tommy John's surgery. But it'll be interesting to see. Again, the trade deadline is a week away, so it's going to be an exciting time. We'll have you updated with all the latest news, and hopefully the Blue Jays can win today with Yusei Kikuchi on the mound. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thanks.